Elias Vance had repaired engines in vacuum, crawled through reactor ducts hot enough to soften steel, and once spent 9 hours trapped inside a cargo elevator with a malfunctioning sanitation drone. Yet somehow, none of those experiences made him feel as uncomfortable as standing beneath the gates of the royal palace of Vaelora. The palace did not resemble anything Elias would have willingly called a building. It floated above the capital city like a silver continent suspended in the violet sky, held in place by immense gravitational anchors buried deep beneath the surrounding mountains. Needle-shaped towers rose from its surface, their transparent walls reflecting the pale rings of the planet above. Hundreds of small diplomatic craft moved around it in perfect patterns, guided by invisible traffic fields. Elias stared upward, holding his dented red toolbox in one hand. "Unnecessarily dramatic," he muttered. The security drone beside him rotated its metallic head. Statement unclear. The palace. Royal architecture is intentionally dramatic. At least somebody admits it. The drone remained silent, apparently deciding that human sarcasm was outside its programming. Elias passed through 3 security fields, surrendered 2 unauthorized screwdrivers, argued successfully for the return of a plasma wrench, and finally entered the engineering sector beneath the palace. He had been hired through a civilian maintenance contract to inspect a series of irregular gravity fluctuations reported during preparations for the Celestial Concord. His instructions had been simple. Inspect the regulators. Repair what could be repaired. Do not interfere with royal ceremonies. Elias particularly appreciated the final instruction. He had spent 34 years successfully avoiding royalty, politicians, admirals, and anybody whose clothing contained more gold than practical pockets. Unfortunately, the palace appeared determined to introduce him to all 4 categories at once. The first gravity regulator he inspected was behaving strangely. Its diagnostic crystal claimed everything was normal, while the machine beneath it vibrated hard enough to make his teeth ache. Elias crouched beside the access panel. "You're lying." The crystal projected a calm blue symbol, system functioning within acceptable parameters. That's exactly what a broken machine says. He removed the panel. A pulse of artificial gravity hit him. For half a second, Elias weighed almost 3 times his normal mass. His knees buckled, his toolbox slammed into the floor, and a maintenance robot passing nearby flattened like an offended metal insect. Then gravity returned to normal. The robot slowly lifted itself. Incident recorded. Don't make it sound personal. Maintenance complaint submitted. Elias sighed. Of course. He scanned the regulator again. Something was wrong, far beyond ordinary mechanical failure. The fluctuations were too precise, too rhythmic. Before he could investigate further, every light in the corridor flashed gold. A palace announcement echoed overhead. Celestial Concord reception beginning. Engineering access routes temporarily redirected. No. The floor beneath Elias illuminated. A glowing arrow appeared. He stared at it. The arrow pointed directly toward the ceremonial levels. No. Another arrow appeared. Then another. The palace navigation intelligence spoke pleasantly. Please follow the illuminated route. My destination is Engineering Junction 7. Route unavailable. Alternative route. Through the grand reception hall. Elias closed his eyes. Somewhere in the universe, he thought, there was clearly a cosmic intelligence whose sole purpose was inconveniencing technicians. Several minutes later, Elias stepped through enormous silver doors and immediately regretted every decision that had brought him there. The grand reception hall could have contained a small, human town. Hundreds of alien dignitaries filled the vast chamber. Holographic constellations drifted beneath the ceiling. Floating chandeliers made from captured plasma moved slowly above long crystal tables. Musicians played instruments that seemed to contain miniature thunderstorms. Elias stood among them wearing gray maintenance clothes. He looked down at himself. There was grease on his sleeve. Excellent. Nobody important would possibly notice him. At the opposite side of the hall, Queen Seralyne entered. Conversation softened instantly. Elias had seen official images of her before, but the recordings failed to capture the strange authority of her presence. She looked remarkably human at first glance, tall and graceful, with pale features and dark silver hair falling across her shoulders. Only her elegant long ears revealed her alien heritage. A thin crown rested above her brow, glowing faintly with embedded circuitry. Beside her walked a little girl, Princess Lyra. She had her mother's long ears, though hers seemed slightly too large for her small face. She wore a white ceremonial dress covered in shifting points of light and looked profoundly bored by everything happening around her. Elias understood her immediately. Then the floor vibrated, barely noticeable, but Elias felt it. His expression changed. Another gravity pulse. Something deep beneath the palace was getting worse. He opened his toolbox and reached for the handheld scanner. At that exact moment, Princess Lyra looked across the hall. Her eyes passed over ambassadors, soldiers, nobles, and diplomats, then stopped. On him. Elias glanced behind himself. Nothing but a serving robot, carrying drinks. The girl's eyes widened. She grabbed her mother's hand. Queen Seralyne looked down. Lyra leaned close to her and whispered something. The queen suddenly became completely still. Her face lost its carefully controlled royal expression. She stared directly at Elias. The nearest advisors noticed. Then the guards. Then the diplomats. Conversation faded across the hall until hundreds of people were silently looking in the same direction. Elias slowly lowered his scanner. "This feels unhealthy," he whispered. The serving robot beside him rotated toward the crowd. "Would you like a beverage?" "Yes." The robot offered him a glass. Elias took it. "What did I do?" "Insufficient information." Across the hall, Lyra whispered again, louder this time. "Mom, that man is here." Queen Seralyne's lips parted in disbelief. Elias looked over his shoulder once more. Still nobody there. He glanced at the serving robot. "Are you wanted for something?" "Negative." "Then apparently it's me." The silence in the reception hall lasted only a few seconds, but to Elias, it stretched long enough for him to reconsider nearly every choice he had made since adolescence. Princess Lyra was still staring at him. Queen Seralyne was still staring at him. Several hundred nobles were now staring at him too. Elias lifted the glass the serving robot had given him and took a cautious sip. It was not water. He swallowed. "What is this?" "Fermented lunar nectar," the robot replied. Elias looked at the glowing silver liquid. "Of course it is." Then Princess Lyra slipped free of her mother's hand and ran. The queen reached for her too late. "Lyra!" The girl crossed the polished floor directly toward Elias, weaving between startled dignitaries. Two royal guards moved after her, but Seralyne raised one hand and stopped them. Elias remained exactly where he was. Moving suddenly seemed like the kind of decision that might result in ceremonial weapons being pointed at him. Lyra stopped in front of him. For several moments, she simply looked up. Her face carried the strange seriousness children sometimes used when confronting something they had imagined for years and unexpectedly found standing in front of them. Then her gaze dropped to the toolbox. Her expression transformed. "You still have it." Elias blinked. "Have what?" "The ugly red box." He looked down. His toolbox was red, scratched, dented along one edge and repaired in 3 places with mismatched metal plates. "That is a highly respected piece of engineering equipment." Lyra frowned. "My mother said it was ugly." Elias slowly looked toward Queen Seralyne. The queen had begun walking toward them. "I see." Lyra crouched beside the toolbox and examined a burn mark near the handle. "This is the same one." Elias felt the first real chill of uncertainty. "How would you know that?" The girl looked surprised by the question. "Because I know you." "You've never met me." "I have." "No, you haven't." "Yes, I have." Elias glanced around. A dozen ambassadors were listening openly now. One elderly diplomat had even leaned closer. Elias lowered his voice. When? Lyra touched her own stomach. Before I was born. He stared at her. That seems administratively difficult. A few nearby officials failed to hide their laughter. Then Queen Seralyne reached them. Up close, Elias could see that her composure had not returned completely. Her long ears had angled slightly backward, an expression he vaguely remembered from Vaelora body language manuals as shock or distress. Her eyes settled on his face. Elias Vance. He stiffened. Nobody at the palace should have known his name except engineering administration. Your Majesty. Seralyne studied him as though comparing the man before her to a memory preserved for years. You truly do not recognize me. It was not accusation. That somehow made it worse. Elias searched her face carefully. Beautiful, pale, composed, unmistakably royal. Nothing. I apologize. A strange softness entered her expression. No, you have nothing to apologize for. She looked at the toolbox. That survived too. Elias followed her gaze. Barely. Apparently that is a talent you both share. That sentence struck something inside him. Not a memory exactly. More like the outline of one. Metal screaming. Emergency lights, smoke. A woman coughing somewhere behind a collapsed bulkhead. Elias's fingers tightened around the glass. Seralyne noticed. The Aster Veil, she said. The hall disappeared. Not literally. But for one violent heartbeat, Elias no longer saw crystal floors or floating chandeliers. He saw fire, 7 years earlier. The refugee transport Aster Veil rotating helplessly above the mining world Karthos. Thousands of passengers trapped aboard while an antimatter containment rupture tore through the lower decks. Elias remembered being 27, terrified, exhausted, and very certain he was going to die. He remembered emergency doors refusing to open. He remembered carrying people. He remembered a pregnant woman. His eyes returned to Seralyne. No. Her voice was quiet. Yes. Elias stared at her. You were aboard that ship? I was. Lyra smiled proudly. She was the woman you carried. Memories came faster now. A narrow medical corridor. A woman with blood along one side of her face. Long ears hidden beneath a torn hood. Her hand gripping his sleeve while another explosion shook the deck. He had never known her name. The refugees aboard the Aster Veil had come from 6 systems. Elias had been part of a civilian repair crew hitching passage toward Earth-controlled space. He had thought she was simply another passenger. You were pregnant, he said. Seralyne looked at Lyra. Yes. Elias's gaze moved slowly to the child. Something inside his chest tightened. Lyra pointed at herself. With me. For once Elias had no joke ready. The hall remained impossibly quiet. He remembered the escape capsule. The medical systems had been dead. The woman had barely been conscious. He had dragged a portable power unit across 2 decks, bypassed the capsule's damaged controls, and forced its launch mechanism to cycle manually. Afterward, he had gone back inside the ship because other passengers were still trapped. He had never learned who survived. Seralyne spoke softly. You gave the capsule your suit's emergency power cell. Elias looked down. I had forgotten that. I did not. Her voice trembled almost imperceptibly. That cell powered the medical stabilizer long enough to keep both of us alive. Elias looked at Lyra again. The little girl was watching him with an expression far too trusting for someone who had known him for less than 5 minutes. How did you recognize me? Lyra's face brightened. Mother has your picture. Seralyne closed her eyes briefly. Lyra. In her room. Lyra. Beside her bed. Several nobles nearby exchanged fascinated looks. Elias raised one eyebrow. The queen looked suddenly more uncomfortable than she had while discussing an exploding refugee ship. It is an emergency recording. Beside your bed? For historical reasons. Lyra nodded enthusiastically. She looks at it when she's sad. Seralyne's long ears turned visibly pink. Elias decided that alien biology was unexpectedly informative. Then Lyra reached into a small bracelet around her wrist. A hologram appeared. The image was distorted by static. A younger Elias stood inside a burning corridor, covered in soot, half his jacket torn away, shouting at someone outside the recording. He looked terrible. Lyra smiled. "That's you." Elias studied the image. "That may be the worst picture anyone has ever taken of me." Seralyne finally laughed. It was brief, surprised, and completely unlike the controlled expression of the queen who had entered the hall. For the first time, Elias saw the frightened woman from the aster veil inside her, and suddenly, he remembered her eyes. Not the crown, not the palace, not the title. Just those eyes looking back at him through smoke while the ship died around them. "You really are her," he whispered. Seralyne's smile faded into something quieter. "And you really are him." Beneath their feet, deep inside Vaelora's enormous gravitational framework, something pulsed. Once, twice, then a third time. Elias felt it through his boots. His attention dropped instantly toward the floor. The rhythm was the same as before, but stronger. Seralyne noticed the change in his face. "What is it?" Elias stared toward the palace depths. "The reason I was sent here." Another faint vibration moved through the hall. This time, several glasses trembled on the tables. Elias closed his toolbox. "And I think your palace has chosen a very inconvenient moment to start falling apart." The next gravity pulse came hard enough to make the chandeliers tremble. Several nobles gasped as the crystal glasses on the nearest table lifted a few centimeters from the surface and settled again. Elias did not move. He watched the ceiling, counted silently, then looked toward the nearest wall panel. 7 seconds. Exactly 7. Queen Seralyne noticed his expression. "You expected that." "I expected something." That was not reassuring. It wasn't meant to be. Lyra looked delighted. "Is the palace breaking?" Seralyne looked down at her. "No." Elias opened his toolbox. "Yes." The queen gave him a look. He cleared his throat. "Possibly." Lyra grinned. "I like his answer better." A royal guard approached, but Seralyne dismissed him with a small gesture and turned back to Elias. "Can you determine the cause?" "I can try." "You were already trying." "Yes, but now the floor is participating." Another pulse rolled beneath them. Elias crouched beside a decorative wall panel. He pressed 2 fingers against the seam, found the hidden service release, and pulled the panel free. A nearby ambassador recoiled. "Is he allowed to do that?" Elias glanced over his shoulder. "Not emotionally, apparently." Behind the polished wall lay a dense network of luminous conduits carrying power, data, atmosphere controls, and gravitational synchronization signals throughout the palace. Elias connected his scanner. The display filled with numbers, then froze, then displayed a cheerful green message. "System stable." Elias frowned. Seralyne leaned closer. "It says the system is stable." "It is lying." "Machines lie?" "Only the expensive ones." Lyra crouched beside him. "What are you looking for?" "A pattern." She leaned even closer. "What kind?" "The kind that explains why the palace keeps trying to flatten us." Seralyne reached down and gently pulled her daughter back. "Give him space." Lyra obeyed for nearly 4 seconds. Elias isolated the pulse history. The fluctuations were appearing across different regulators in perfect sequence. Not random, not mechanical, deliberate. That bothered him. A failing gravity system should have been chaotic. This one behaved like a musician following a score. He unplugged the scanner. "I need access to the lower engineering sector." Seralyne nodded. "I will have the royal technicians escort you." "No." The word came out faster than intended. Several guards stiffened. Elias looked around. "I mean, respectfully, no." Seralyne raised one eyebrow. Why? Because if this is what I think it is, I don't know who has access to the system. Silence returned. Not the awkward silence from before. A colder one. You suspect sabotage, Seralyne said. I suspect something intelligent, Lyra whispered. Sabotage is more exciting. Seralyne gave her daughter a long look. It is not. Usually it is. Elias almost smiled. The Queen did not. Within minutes, they had left the reception hall through a restricted passage hidden behind a wall of shifting holographic art. Seralyne insisted on accompanying him. Elias objected. She ignored him. He objected again. She ignored him more royally. Lyra followed both of them. This time Elias stopped. No. Lyra crossed her arms. I can help. You're 6. Almost 7. That changes everything. It does. Seralyne finally intervened. Lyra stays with Captain Theron. The girl's long ears drooped. Elias felt unexpectedly guilty. Then Lyra pointed at his toolbox. Don't lose the ugly box. Elias placed a hand over his chest. Some wounds never heal. She smiled. The engineering lift carried Elias and Seralyne downward through the palace. The transparent walls revealed layers of impossible machinery passing around them. Artificial gravity rings rotated through vacuum chambers. Coolant rivers glowed beneath transparent channels. Quantum processors the size of buildings shimmered with blue-white energy. Elias stared. Seralyne noticed. Impressed. Concerned. Why? You have too much technology. That is not a normal complaint. It is when nobody remembers where all the switches are. For the first time since the reception hall, she smiled. The lift slowed. Elias caught her reflection in the glass. Without hundreds of people surrounding her, Seralyne seemed different. Less like a queen, more like the woman from his memory. He remembered her lying inside the escape capsule, her hand refusing to release his. You kept the picture, he said. She looked at him. For 7 years. Why? Her expression softened. Because I never knew whether you survived. Elias looked away. I did. I see that. Mostly. She laughed quietly. Then the lights in the lift flickered. Elias froze. A sound echoed through the shaft. 3 metallic clicks. Then a low electronic hum. The lift stopped. Seralyne looked upward. Normal? No. The transparent walls darkened. Emergency lights activated. Elias opened his toolbox and pulled out a compact plasma driver. What happened? Someone killed the lift controls. Can you restart them? Probably. Probably. He knelt beside the control panel. I usually sound more confident after I know what I'm doing. The panel opened. Inside, the royal circuitry glowed faintly. Elias connected his scanner. The screen flashed. A line of code appeared, then disappeared. He stared. What? Seralyne asked. Elias replayed the data. The code returned for less than a second. An encrypted command, ancient architecture hidden beneath modern palace protocols. He had seen something like it before, years ago, aboard a burning refugee ship. His hand stopped. Seralyne saw the change immediately. You recognize it. Elias looked at her. The aster veil. Her face went still. What about it? The ship's systems were behaving strangely before the reactor failed. You never mentioned that. I thought everything was breaking because half the ship was on fire. He expanded the code signature. The same unusual sequence appeared again. Different system. Different planet. 7 years apart. Same structure. Elias felt cold. The lift suddenly dropped half a meter. Seralyne grabbed the railing. Elias slammed the access cover closed. We need to get out. Why? Because this isn't a malfunction. Another encrypted signal flashed across the scanner. This one carried a command. Gravity control override. Elias stared at it, then at Seralyne. Someone is inside the palace network. The lift dropped again, much farther. Seralyne's hand moved toward the weapon at her side. Elias grabbed the emergency brake lever. "If anyone asks," he said through clenched teeth, "this is not how I planned our reunion." Seralyne gripped the railing as the lift shook violently. "I had imagined fewer falling elevators." "Good, we agree on something." Deep beneath them, the gravitational core pulsed again, and this time, Elias understood the rhythm. It was not merely destabilizing the palace, it was counting down. The emergency brake caught with a violent metallic scream. Elias slammed shoulder first into the lift wall, while Seralyne managed to remain standing through what he considered an unnecessarily impressive display of royal balance. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Elias looked at her. "Still fewer falling elevators than you imagine?" Seralyne released the railing. "Marginally." He opened the service panel beneath the controls and pulled out 2 braided power leads. Sparks snapped between them. The lift hung somewhere between the ceremonial levels and the engineering depths, suspended inside a shaft so wide that entire freight transports could have passed through it. Elias connected his scanner again. The countdown signature was still moving through the palace network, not in seconds, in cycles. Each gravity pulse was synchronizing another regulator with the hidden command. He frowned. "This is worse than I thought." Seralyne stepped closer. "That sentence seems to follow you." "I work in maintenance." He enlarged the system map. Dozens of gravitational anchors appeared in red. "If these synchronize fully, the palace won't simply lose artificial gravity. The orbital stabilizers will begin compensating against one another." Seralyne understood immediately. "The station will fall." "Yes." "Onto the capital." "Yes." She looked at the display. "How long?" Elias hesitated. "Not long enough to finish the reception." "That is not a unit of time." "It is in politics." He removed a rectangular device from the toolbox and attached it to the lift wall. The casing unfolded, exposing 3 mechanical clamps and an old-fashioned pressure gauge. Seralyne stared. "What is that?" "A manual bypass. It looks ancient. It works. It has a dial." "Exactly. You trust that more than the palace computer?" "I trust rocks more than the palace computer right now." The bypass forced the service hatch open. Cold air rushed into the lift. Beyond the opening lay a narrow maintenance bridge stretching through the dark shaft toward an emergency access tunnel. Seralyne looked down. Hundreds of meters below, energy conduits glowed like veins of white fire. Elias stepped onto the bridge. The metal flexed. He looked back. "Comfortable with heights?" "No." "Excellent. Neither am I." They crossed slowly. Halfway over, the gravity shifted. Elias's body suddenly became light enough that one step nearly sent him upward. Seralyne grabbed his jacket. The next pulse reversed it. Both of them dropped hard against the bridge. Elias groaned. "I officially dislike your palace. It was not designed to do this. That is what makes it disappointing." They reached the emergency tunnel and continued downward. The deeper levels of Vaelora were nothing like the polished royal chambers above. Here the station revealed its age. Old conduits ran beside new quantum interfaces. Entire sections of wall carried inscriptions from earlier dynasties. Some maintenance doors had been sealed for centuries and bypassed by newer corridors. Elias slowed. The hidden code was moving through those older systems. That made no sense. Modern palace security had been layered over the original infrastructure generations ago. Whoever had inserted the sabotage either possessed forgotten architectural maps or had access to royal archives. Seralyne seemed to reach the same conclusion. This was planned by someone inside the court. Probably. You sound pleased. I like problems that narrow themselves down. To several thousand possible officials? Better than several billion citizens. She gave him a dry look. Eventually they reached Gravity Regulation Junction 4. The chamber was enormous. 3 rotating rings surrounded a central sphere of compressed energy. Streams of artificial mass shimmered around it like transparent ribbons. A team of royal engineers rushed toward them. Their supervisor, Chief Regulator Avon, bowed sharply. "Your Majesty, you should not be here." Seralyne looked toward Elias. "I am beginning to hear that frequently." Avon turned. "And who is this?" "The technician." Elias lifted one hand. "Apparently the offensive one." Avon frowned. "We have inspected every regulator. There is no sabotage." Elias looked at the massive machine. "Then your regulator is attempting suicide independently." The engineer stiffened. "Our systems are the finest in the Empire." "Congratulations." Elias walked toward the main console. The diagnostics glowed green. "Performance optimal." He tapped the screen. "Still lying?" Avon folded his arms. "And what exactly do you think you will discover that we have not?" Elias pulled a small metal box from his toolbox. No holographic interface, no quantum processor, just wires, switches, and a mechanical recording needle. Avon stared. "What is that?" "Something your saboteur can't hack." He connected it directly to the regulator's raw output. The needle began scratching across a strip of polymer. At first, the pattern looked meaningless. Then, Elias aligned the spikes with the gravity pulses. A repeating sequence emerged. 7, 3, 7, 3, 7. Seralyne moved closer. "What does it mean?" "I don't know yet." Avon scoffed. "Then this proves nothing." A small voice behind them said, "It looks like the palace bells." Everyone turned. Princess Lyra stood in the doorway. Captain Theron stood behind her, looking profoundly defeated. Seralyne's face changed. "Lyra." "I was bored." Theron cleared his throat. "She escaped." "I did not escape," Lyra said. "I followed." Elias looked at the recording. "The bells." Lyra nodded. "The old ceremonial bells. 7 notes, then 3. Seralyne stared at the pattern. Those bells had not been used in decades. Elias searched the archive terminal manually. 7-3. A historical protocol appeared. "Royal Succession Emergency Network. Access restricted." Seralyne went very still. "That network predates my reign." Elias looked at her. "Who can access it?" "Only the Sovereign, the Chancellor, and Orbital Security Command." Avon's expression changed. The list was suddenly very short. Then every light in the chamber turned red. An alarm erupted. "Security override active. The doors sealed." Elias looked at the monitor. A new command appeared. "Royal location confirmed." His stomach tightened. This wasn't only about crashing the palace. Seralyne drew her weapon. "What else?" The chamber's security drones descended from the ceiling. Their targeting beams locked onto the Queen. Elias grabbed Lyra and pulled her behind the regulator housing. Seralyne fired first. The room exploded into light. Elias ducked as a plasma bolt cut through the air above him. Lyra looked up from behind his arm. "Is this sabotage?" "Yes." She nodded seriously. "I told Mother it was more exciting." The first security drone hit the floor in a shower of sparks. Seralyne had fired once. That was all it took. The Queen moved with a speed Elias had not expected from someone who, less than an hour earlier, had been standing beneath chandeliers wearing ceremonial silver. Her plasma pistol snapped toward the second drone, and the shot punched through its central sensor before it could adjust its aim. Elias pulled Lyra lower behind the regulator housing. "Your mother does this often." Lyra peeked over the edge. "Not during receptions." That is somehow reassuring. Captain Theron and Chief Avon took cover behind the opposite console as 3 more drones descended from the ceiling. Elias watched their targeting beams. They were not sweeping the room. They were ignoring everyone except Seralyne. "Confirmed," he muttered. "What?" Lyra asked. "They are trying to kill your mother." Her expression lost its amusement. That bothered him more than the plasma fire. Elias opened his toolbox. Inside were diagnostic scanners, cable cutters, field clamps, 2 thermal probes, a manual fusion key, and several objects that palace engineers had already looked at with deep professional disappointment. He grabbed a signal scrambler. It was old, very old, which was precisely why he liked it. He twisted the dial. Nothing happened. Lyra stared. Is it broken? No. It looks broken. It has character. He struck the side of the device with his palm. The scrambler activated. Lyra smiled. That fixed it. Advanced human engineering. He increased the output. The nearest drone suddenly spun toward the wall and opened fire on a ventilation grill. Elias nodded. See? Another drone rotated in confused circles. Chief Avon stared from across the chamber. That device is analog. Yes. That technology was obsolete before your species joined the Concord. Which is why your very sophisticated murder robots don't know what to do with it. Seralyne destroyed the final functioning drone. Silence returned. Smoke drifted across the chamber. Lyra stood. That was exciting. Seralyne turned sharply. No. Lyra hesitated. A little? No. Elias closed the toolbox. Your mother is correct. Lyra looked betrayed. You said sabotage was exciting. I said you said it. That is unfair. It is called adulthood. Seralyne almost smiled despite herself. Then the central display flashed. The gravity countdown had accelerated. Elias's expression tightened. Someone had detected their interference. He returned to the analog recorder. The 7-3 sequence was still repeating, but a second pattern now sat beneath it. 3 pulses. Pause. 5 pulses. Pause. 2. Elias looked at Lyra. What else do you know about old palace ceremonies? Seralyne raised an eyebrow. You are asking my 6-year-old daughter. She solved the last one. Lyra looked extremely pleased. Seralyne looked less pleased. The child studied the pattern. 3-5-2. Elias waited. Lyra frowned. Then her eyes widened. Guardian oath. Seralyne froze. Theron stepped closer. The orbital commanders. Lyra nodded. At coronations. 3 words, 5 words, 2 words. Elias pulled up the archival index. A restricted personnel channel appeared. Royal Guardian Network. He exhaled. Who controls it? Seralyne already knew. Orbital Security Command. Theron's face hardened. Lord Mareth. Chief Avon shook his head. Impossible. Mareth has served the crown for 22 years. Elias looked at him. That is usually enough time to learn where all the dangerous buttons are. Seralyne did not respond. She was staring at the display. Lord Mareth was not merely another noble. He commanded the palace defense grid, the orbital fleets around Vaelora, and every emergency evacuation route from the royal station. If he was the saboteur, then the palace had effectively placed its throat in his hands. Elias looked at the old signal map. Before we accuse him, we need proof. Theron frowned. We already have his network. We have a network he controls. That is not the same thing. Seralyne looked at Elias. You think someone wants us to suspect him? Maybe. Why? To make us move against the wrong person. The chamber fell silent again. Then Lyra raised her hand. Everyone looked at her. There was a man at the reception. Seralyne knelt. What man? He asked me where you sleep. Theron's face changed instantly. Elias crouched beside her. When? Before I found you. Did you know him? Lyra nodded. Lord Mareth. Seralyne's expression hardened. What exactly did he say? He asked if I still slept in Mother's rooms when there were storms. Elias and Seralyne exchanged a look. That was not proof, but it was close enough to be ugly. Lyra continued. I told him no. Do you? Elias asked. She smiled faintly. Yes. Elias pointed at her. Good instinct. The palace shuddered, this time violently. Gravity surged sideways. Everyone slammed against the nearest surface. One of the regulator rings groaned. Red warning symbols appeared across the chamber. Orbital vector deviation. Elias pushed himself upright. How bad? Avon checked the console. His face went pale. We have lost 0.03 degrees. Seralyne stared at him. That does not sound significant. It is, Elias said. Vaelora's orbital palace was not a moon. It was a controlled artificial mass moving through a narrow gravitational corridor above the capital. 0.03 degrees was enough to begin a descent, slowly at first, then not slowly at all. A communication channel suddenly opened. A man's face appeared above the central console. Lord Mareth, silver-haired, calm, still wearing ceremonial armor. Your Majesty. Seralyne stood. Mareth, I am relieved you are alive. Elias watched the signal metadata instead of the man. Too clean, too direct. Mareth continued. The palace has suffered a catastrophic engineering failure. For your safety, you must proceed immediately to evacuation chamber 12. Elias's eyes narrowed. Chamber 12 appeared on his local map, directly above a sealed gravitational conduit. A dead end. Seralyne looked at Elias. He shook his head once. Mareth noticed. And who is the human? Elias stepped closer to the console. Maintenance. Mareth's expression barely changed. You are interfering with emergency protocols. That is what maintenance does. Your Majesty, evacuate now. Seralyne's voice cooled. Why chamber 12? A pause. Tiny. But Elias saw it. Mareth answered, It is the closest secure location. Elias checked the map again. No, it isn't. Mareth looked at him. Elias continued, Chamber 8 is 30 meters closer. Silence. Then the transmission cut. Seralyne stared at the empty hologram. Theron drew his weapon. That is enough for me. Elias looked down at the analog recorder. Another signal had appeared during the communication, buried beneath Mareth's transmission. A routing trace. It did not originate from orbital security. It came from somewhere deeper inside the palace, somewhere ancient, somewhere sealed. Elias zoomed in. The location identifier appeared. Archive Vault 0. Seralyne whispered, That vault has been closed for 400 years. Elias picked up his toolbox. Then somebody has been very patient. Lyra reached for his hand. He looked down at her. Absolutely not. She frowned. You need me. Elias looked toward Seralyne. The Queen sighed. She has unfortunately established precedent. Elias closed his eyes. I miss elevators. The palace shook again. Far above them, alarms began spreading through Vaelora. And somewhere inside a vault no living technician was supposed to access. The old system sent one final message across Elias's scanner. Targets identified. Seralyne, Lyra, Elias Vance. Archive Vault 0 lay beneath sections of the palace that no modern map acknowledged. Elias learned this after spending 12 minutes arguing with 3 different navigation systems, all of which insisted that the corridor in front of him did not exist. He stood beneath a flickering emergency light and looked at the sealed passage. This is encouraging. Seralyne glanced at him. You say that when you mean the opposite. You are learning quickly. Lyra walked between them while Captain Theron followed with his weapon drawn. The palace shook again. Dust fell from the ceiling. Far above, evacuation alarms echoed through kilometers of metal and crystal as Vaelora continued slipping from its orbital corridor. Elias checked his scanner. The descent had accelerated. We have maybe 1 stabilization cycle before the anchors stop compensating. Theron frowned. How long is that? Not enough time to explain it comfortably. The corridor ended at a circular door covered in ancient Vaeloran symbols. No keypad, no visible mechanism. Only a dark metal surface that looked older than the palace surrounding it. Seralyne placed her hand against the center. Nothing happened. Theron tried his command authorization. Nothing. Elias opened his toolbox. Seralyne looked at him. You cannot possibly intend to repair a 400-year-old royal vault with that. I intend to offend it until it opens. Lyra nodded solemnly. That usually works. He found an access seam beneath the lower ring and inserted a narrow mechanical probe. The vault responded with a pulse of blue light. A voice spoke from the door. "Unauthorized human signature." Elias paused. "That feels personal." Then a second line appeared. "Elias Vance identified." Everyone froze. Seralyne stepped closer. "The system knows you." I noticed. The door opened. Cold air rolled outward. Beyond it stretched an enormous chamber filled with suspended data crystals, dormant machines, and rows of black pillars disappearing into darkness. At the center stood a single active console, and beside it stood Lord Merith. He was not alone. 6 armed security soldiers surrounded him. Seralyne raised her weapon. Merith sighed. "I had hoped you would follow instructions. You tried to send me into a trap. I tried to keep you contained." Elias looked around. "That is a less polite way of saying trap." Merith's gaze shifted to him. "You were never supposed to return." There it was. Not confusion, recognition. Elias felt something tighten inside him. The Aster Veil. Merith did not deny it. Seralyne's face went cold. "You destroyed that ship. I attempted to prevent a succession crisis. You murdered civilians. I sacrificed a vessel. 3,000 people were aboard." Merith's expression remained calm, and the Empire survived. Seralyne's long ears angled sharply backward. Elias had learned enough by now to know that was not a good sign. Lyra moved closer to him. Merith noticed. The child was never meant to survive. Elias stopped breathing for half a second. Then he stepped in front of her. Merith smiled faintly. "And neither were you." He touched the console. The chamber doors slammed shut. Gravity disappeared. Everyone lifted from the floor. Weapons, tools, and loose fragments rose into the air. Then gravity returned sideways. The soldiers crashed into the wall. Elias slammed into a pillar and nearly lost consciousness. Seralyne fired while falling. One soldier's weapon exploded from his hand. Theron struck another in midair as gravity shifted again. Lyra screamed. Elias saw her drifting toward an open energy conduit. He pushed from the pillar. "Lyra!" Gravity reversed. The child dropped upward toward the ceiling. Elias caught a hanging cable, swung, and grabbed her wrist. For one terrible second, both of them hung suspended above the conduit. Blue energy roared beneath them. Lyra looked down. "I do not like this." "Finally, we agree." Another pulse threw them toward the far wall. Elias twisted his body and took the impact across his back, shielding her. Pain exploded through his ribs. He heard Seralyne shout his name. Then gravity normalized. Elias hit the floor. Lyra landed on top of him. She looked horrified. "Are you dead?" He opened one eye. "Unfortunately for my schedule, no." She hugged him. Across the chamber, Seralyne had disarmed 2 soldiers. Theron fought another near the console. Merith backed toward the central machine. Elias forced himself upright. His scanner was still attached to his belt. The display was flashing. Orbital failure imminent. He looked at the ancient machine. The sabotage was not running through the modern network at all. It was coming from here. Vault 0 was controlling the gravitational anchors. Merith saw him understand. "You cannot stop it." Elias limped toward the console. "That sentence has motivated technicians for thousands of years." Merith drew a blade. Seralyne intercepted him. Metal struck metal. The Queen fought with terrifying precision, driving Merith away from Elias while Theron finished disabling the remaining guards. Elias reached the console. Ancient code flooded the screen. Too fast, too complex. But beneath it was something familiar. The same architecture from the Aster Veil, the same sequencing, the same sabotage method. He found the core command. Orbital descent. Irreversible. Elias stared, then smiled. That is unnecessarily confident. He opened the toolbox. Most of his advanced equipment had been damaged. What remained was an old mechanical coupling, 2 insulated leads, a manual field bridge, and one power regulator designed for human mining equipment. Seralyne glanced toward him while blocking Marith's blade. "Can you stop it?" "No." She looked alarmed. Elias connected the regulator. "But I can make it listen to something else." He bypassed the data system entirely and fed a false gravitational reference directly into the anchor control. The ancient machine hesitated. Lights flickered. Marith shouted, "What have you done?" "Lied to your machine." A deep vibration shook the vault. The descent slowed, not stopped, slowed. Elias checked the readings. His smile vanished. The central gravitational core had already begun collapsing. The sabotage had gone too far. Seralyne finally drove Marith to the floor, and Theron restrained him. She rushed to Elias. "Tell me we are safe." "We are not." Her face tightened. Elias pointed toward the schematic. "The anchors can stabilize the station, but only if the core is manually realigned." "Then do it." He looked at her. "The controls are inside the chamber." Seralyne followed his gaze. A sealed door stood beyond the console. Warning symbols covered it. Gravitational shear, lethal exposure, manual access prohibited. Lyra shook her head immediately. "No." Elias looked down at her. The fear in her eyes was the same fear he remembered from another ship, another corridor, another impossible choice. He crouched. "Hey, you cannot go in." "I have to. My mother said you almost died last time." Elias looked at Seralyne. The Queen's expression had changed. 7 years had disappeared from her face. She was once again the injured woman in the escape capsule, watching him turn back toward a burning ship. "You did this before," she whispered. Elias stood. "Apparently I have poor habits." Seralyne grabbed his arm. "There must be another way." He looked at the core readings. There isn't. The palace shook violently. Above them, Vaelora dropped another fraction toward the world below. Elias picked up the battered red toolbox. Lyra stared at it, then at him. He forced a small smile. "Don't worry." Her eyes filled with tears. "You always say jokes when things are bad." "That is because screaming is less professional." Seralyne's grip tightened. Elias met her eyes. This time, unlike 7 years ago, she knew his name, and he knew hers. He opened the gravitational chamber door. White light flooded the vault. The toolbox vibrated in his hand. Elias stepped forward. Behind him, Seralyne whispered, "Come back." He looked over his shoulder. "I still need to complain about your elevators." Then he entered the collapsing core. Inside the gravitational core, direction ceased to mean anything. Elias stepped through the containment field and immediately felt his body pulled in 3 different ways. The chamber curved around a sphere of compressed artificial mass, its surface rippling like black glass under white fire. Broken tools, fragments of insulation, and droplets of coolant orbited the sphere in slow, impossible circles. His boots left the floor. He grabbed a maintenance rail. "Of course," the core answered with a deep pulse. His scanner flashed. Structural collapse, 81%. Elias opened the red toolbox with one hand. Most of the contents lifted out. A screwdriver floated past his face. He caught it. "Not now." Outside the chamber, Seralyne watched through the observation field, while Chief Avon attempted to restore external controls. Theron guarded Marith. Lyra stood beside her mother, both hands pressed against the transparent barrier. Elias could not hear them. He could see enough. Seralyne looked furious. Lyra looked terrified. He preferred the Queen's expression. Fear was harder to ignore. The core required 3 synchronization nodes to be physically realigned. The first was already half melted. Elias reached it by pulling himself along the rail, while gravity changed around him in violent waves. For 2 seconds he became nearly weightless. Then his body slammed downward. Pain tore through his ribs. He gritted his teeth and connected the human regulator. The ancient Vaeloran system rejected it. Incompatible device. "Yes, we've established that." He stripped 2 wires. Sparks burst across his gloves. The screen changed. Unknown interface. Much better. He bridged the first node manually. Green light appeared, 1 down. The second node was worse. It floated beyond the rail, separated by a gap filled with shimmering gravitational distortion. Elias stared at it. No. The core pulsed. The station shook. His scanner dropped to 89%. He looked back toward Lyra. She lifted the battered holographic image from her bracelet. His younger face appeared against the glass, covered in soot, standing inside the aster veil. Elias understood. 7 years ago, he had survived because he had refused to calculate whether survival was reasonable. Apparently, mathematics was overrated. He pushed away from the rail. Gravity caught him halfway across. His body curved toward the artificial mass. Elias fired the magnetic clamp from his toolbox. It struck the far wall. The cable tightened. He swung past the distortion field and crashed into the second node. Outside, Seralyne visibly shouted something. Elias imagined it was royal language for idiot. He approved. The second node activated. Then the third failed completely. The core began to collapse. Warnings filled his visor. Orbital failure. Core cascade. Impact trajectory confirmed. Elias stared at the destroyed coupling. There was no replacement. Not Vaelora. Not human. Then he looked inside the toolbox, at the old mechanical coupling he had carried for 16 years. Ugly, heavy, obsolete, reliable. He laughed. Lyra's never going to let me forget this. He removed it. The fitting was the wrong size. Naturally, Elias cut the damaged mount away, forced the human coupling between 2 alien conduits, wrapped the connection with emergency sealant, and struck it twice with the handle of his wrench. The system flickered. Chief Avon would probably faint if he saw it. The thought improved Elias's mood. He connected the final lead. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then the ancient core accepted the mechanical bridge. The gravitational sphere contracted. The violent distortions vanished. Elias dropped to the floor. Across Vaelora, the orbital anchors ignited in sequence. 1, 2, 3, then hundreds. The palace stopped falling. High above the capital, the enormous station slowly corrected its trajectory. Inside the core chamber, Elias lay on his back, staring at the ceiling. His scanner displayed one final message: orbital stability restored. He smiled. Still hate this palace. Then he passed out. When Elias woke, the first thing he saw was a pair of long ears. Lyra leaned over him. "You are alive." "Apparently." She hugged him before he could move. His ribs objected violently. He made a sound somewhere between a cough and surrender. Seralyne stood beside the medical bed. Her expression was calmer, though her eyes revealed how little she had slept. "You promised to come back." "I promised to complain about the elevators." "That is not the same thing." It was implied. She laughed. This time there was no court around them, no ceremony, no crown, just Seralyne. Mareth's confession followed quickly. The records recovered from Vault Zero proved he had sabotaged the Aster Veil 7 years earlier, hoping to eliminate Seralyne before the succession. He had hidden the attack inside obsolete royal protocols and waited until the Celestial Concord to finish what he had begun. He failed. Publicly. Spectacularly. Elias found that satisfying. 3 weeks later, the repaired Grand Reception Hall was filled again. This time, Elias stood near the throne wearing formal clothing selected by the royal household. He hated it. There were no pockets. Seralyne addressed representatives from across the empire. 7 years ago, Elias Vance saved a woman he did not know. The hall became silent. He did not know her title. He did not know what she could offer him. He believed only that her life mattered. Her eyes found his. Years later, he did the same for all of us. Applause rolled through the chamber. Elias considered hiding behind a pillar. Lyra had anticipated this and was holding his hand. Seralyne offered him citizenship, wealth, land, and an honorary seat within the royal court. Elias listened carefully, then said, "I want access to engineering." The hall went quiet again. Seralyne blinked. "Engineering? Permanent access." Chief Avon looked alarmed. Elias continued, "And authority to redesign the lift system." Someone laughed. Then another. Seralyne tried to remain serious. She failed. "Granted." Lyra raised her hand. "And he should be my royal technician." Elias looked down. "That sounds suspiciously unpaid." "It is very important." "Does it include lunch?" "Yes." "Then negotiations may proceed." The laughter spread through the hall. Later, after the ceremony, Elias stood with Seralyne and Lyra on a balcony overlooking Vaelora. Below them, the city shone across the curve of the station. Starships crossed the darkness beyond, and the pale planet turned slowly beneath them. Lyra held Elias's hand. Seralyne stood beside him. 7 years ago, they had separated inside fire and believed they would never meet again. Now, neither seemed in a hurry to leave. Elias looked at the repaired towers. "At least it isn't falling anymore." Seralyne smiled. "You sound disappointed." "Give it time." Lyra laughed. Elias looked at them both. For most of his life, he had preferred machines because machines were easier than people. They had faults. You found them. You repaired them. People were different. They remembered you. They waited for you. Sometimes, somehow, they made a place for you before you even knew you needed one. Lyra squeezed his hand. Seralyne's shoulder touched his. Elias looked out across the stars. For once he had nowhere else he wanted to be.